on 5 different topics over 5 days. And today we will hear about the best practice grain storage extension resources from Ben White. And we'll meet him. Well, actually, I'm going to throw straight across to Ben now. Welcome.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, and good morning. Good morning. I appreciate the introduction and the opportunity to have a chat about what we're doing in the world of grain storage under this GRDC investment in on-farm grain storage extension. So I'm an agricultural engineer. I've been working with this particular project for a bit over a decade now. I've also worked with the Condina Group for about 23 years. So we get a fair, I suppose, gamut of cross-sectional material that we can probably talk about, including obviously the grain storage side of things. So I just wanted to talk about the opportunities that might be there for grower groups today and hopefully share some ideas and insights as to what we can do and what we can offer, and perhaps explore some opportunities to work together to get some of this information out there and into the minds of growers. So without further ado, my contact details are there. You'll probably see the 1-800 Weevil contact splashed around a fair bit over the next few slides. That is my Twitter handle. It's also the hotline for any grain storage inquiries. So that's the GRDC hotline. If you ring that number in WA, it will come straight to my mobile and I can help people out. Okay, so without further ado, what's the project about? Well, look, we're all about extending best practice grain management techniques and in particular grain storage. Ultimately, we've got a stack of resources and we want to get those out to growers and I guess enable them as best we can to preserve the quality of grain in storage, and also probably give them some tips and tricks that can make that a lot easier. We also work on extending the latest research findings. So we work very closely with a couple of other GRDC investments, looking at on-farm storage and not just on-farm storage, sorry, but also bulk handler storage, and looking at some of the research coming out of that with regards to resistance, with regards to opportunities for storage that growers may not have explored before, and in particular other forms of storage. So whether that's shorter term bags, sheds, etc. We also want to make sure that the message is sunk in. So we like to work with growers and do test them on their knowledge. We will make calls back to growers after a workshop, maybe a couple of years later, just to see whether we've been able to, I guess, influence some change on farm. So what we're looking at there is making sure that growers have absorbed the information and they can apply it, and then they can actually get that information back out and actually apply it on farm and make some changes that are going to improve their on-farm storage scenario. And then, of course, as I mentioned, that 1-800 phone number, 1-800 Weevil phone number, which comes through to my mobile, we do assist a lot of growers with that, particularly around harvest, particularly around seeding, which is when a lot of them open their grain storage and their seed silos up to get seed out and find that they've had an issue. So we get a lot of calls then, and where they've got market-bound grain, we try and assist them to get that to market without any issues. So a lot of times we'll get calls on that number where people have got a truckload of grain with insects in it and they've been rejected, and we need to try and help them get that sorted out so they can get it to market. So that's what the project is about. It's about extending that information primarily, and it does involve a whole range of approaches to doing that. So why is it important? Look, at the end of the day, we're trying to improve the quality of seed and domestic market-bound grain. We want to make sure that the grain we've got in storage it doesn't deteriorate in quality while it's in that storage facility. Ultimately, we want to reduce germination losses, and I put that in there because everyone in WA stores seed. Not everyone stores market-bound grain, but everyone will store seed on farm, and so we're there wanting to make sure that the seed that's in storage does what it's supposed to do when we pull it out. And in fact, we found with some research work in the northern part of the wheat belt that growers have the opportunity to increase their germinable fraction, if you like, by about 6% just by applying good practice with regard to seed storage. So there is an opportunity there for growers, I guess, to save some money and save some seed, and ensure that their germination fraction remains as high as it possibly can while it's in that storage facility. And we also, if there is market-bound grain, we want to make sure that we reduce shrinkage and spoil grain that is in the storage. There's an opportunity with regard to logistics and freight. When it comes to grain storage, we want to try and help people save some money in that area. If they do have storages, we want to make sure we try and reduce their storage costs. So that can come down to effectively making the right purchasing decision up the front, making sure that they've got a silo that does seal to the Australian standard and is going to do the job they want. Unfortunately, silos that don't seal well or don't perform well, it's not like you can just trade them in. If you've got a lemon tractor and it doesn't work very well, you can trade that in. But with silos, we'd much rather talk to people prior to that purchasing decision. So happy to try and help growers with that. Ultimately, getting grain off the ground and reducing harvest risk is something that's absolutely important. And in a lot of cases, that can influence not only grain quality, but also yield, because if 50% of the grain's on the ground after a storm event, well, that's lost. If you've got some storage and you're able to hang on to that, we'll get the crop off quickly and get it into storage. That's something that we hopefully can help people with. And then, of course, the marketing opportunity, which is about storing grain on farm for a period of time and then seizing market opportunities as they arise down the track. So when you get to a selling point that growers might want, that's when they can sell and obviously pick up the upside that might have come through the market in that period of time. The other reason this is an important project is because phosphine is the only fumigant gas that we have that farmers can apply. It's the only way to disinfest grain. So if there's insects in storage, this is the only chemistry that farmers have access to. Professional fumigators have one or two others up their sleeve, but from a farm perspective, this is phosphine is a very cheap and effective and also easy to apply fumigant. One of the challenges we have is that nationally there is an increase in resistance, and resistance comes through poor use and where growers haven't applied best practice. And you can see on the east coast, the red and blue dots indicate strong resistance. We've got a couple of smaller strong resistance sites in WA. Most of those have been taken care of now, so those sites have been cleaned up. But that's the challenge for us, is to make sure that phosphine remains an effective tool in the shelf when it comes to grain storage. And that's not just only for growers, but CBH are an enormous user of phosphine. And so from a grower perspective, obviously they're the shareholders in CBH. We want to make sure that the efficacy of phosphine continues here for CBH, because the next best option is about 8 times as costly. So maintaining the efficacy of phosphine is absolutely essential. So how can we help growers? Ultimately, as I mentioned before, we want to make sure that we're driving practice change. We want to make sure that that best practice is applied on farm, and we don't hear crazy things like people trying to fumigate in trucks and stuff that might, I guess, challenge the efficacy of phosphine in the future, and also potentially, ruin grain and seed that might be in storage. So, we're happy to work with grower groups and manufacturers and retailers to try and do that. And I suppose one of the challenges is that we want to make sure that growers are getting consistent information from everywhere. And that's why we're happy to work on all those levels. So from a grower group perspective, we want to make sure that the information that growers receive on grain storage is consistent, it is accurate, and it is best practice. And there's a range of channels, I suppose, if you like, that we deliver that with, and we'll run through some of those in a tick. So how do we deliver the information? Well, workshops, both indoor and on farm. So happy to come along if there's an event. I'm happy to tag on with that and deliver a pocket of information on farm storage. I think one of the challenges is, where you've got a big day of information, a lot of speakers. If you have 10 speakers and each of those give the growers 4 or 5 dot points to remember, that's 40 or 50 things they've got to take away. Now, they're not going to remember that. So we want to be quite focused in the delivery of that information and just give them something they can work with and they'll remember and apply. So we tend to focus on best practice hygiene. We tend to work on things like fumigation efficacy and making sure that the fumigant is going to work, and I guess address some of those risks that I mentioned earlier. So yeah, happy to speak at grower group events. The workshops we do indoor and on farm demonstrations are one of the most popular ones. So we'll come along with a blower, with a pressure gauge. We'll teach growers how to do a pressure test. It takes 5 minutes. But literally, when you're standing around outside, that's when we find the best engagement is. That's when you get the best questions, and that's when you get the best buy-in from growers. So more than happy to come anywhere in the state to do that. And as I said, that could be part of another grower group event if that's the case. We also have some pressure test kits that I'm happy to loan out that grower groups can borrow to send around the group, and growers can actually do their own pressure tests on farm. We do run webinars, and that's definitely an option. A Q&A session is something that's pretty popular, and that can just be an email, from a grower group where I can provide some answers. And then, of course, provision of information for newsletters. So if you've got a slot in a newsletter where you would like a little pocket of information on grain storage, particularly coming into harvest or something like that, so from August onwards is a good opportunity. And then, of course, we have a stack of resources in not only the likes of the multimedia, so through YouTube, we've got a social media account which I run, the 1-800-Weevil handle on Twitter, or X as it's now known, and the website Stored Grain. So I'm just going to pop across with my screen to a couple of those just so I can demonstrate what we've got there. So first one we'll look at is the Stored Grain hub. And so there's a stack of information here. And in particular, there's one resource that I'll just draw your attention to, and that's a Stored Grain Grow Note. Now, that's about a 180-page document. It goes into a lot of detail with regard to grain storage, and it's pretty much, we tout it as the Bible for on-farm storage. Now, I do have a stack of hard copies of these, and I also bring them when I come to do an event. So growers actually have something tangible to take away. As I mentioned before, when they've got a lot of resources to work with, hopefully that's come up on your screen now.
Just has
yeah, a little bit slow this morning. Yeah, so the stored grain grow notes are something that's really popular, and growers like to take something tangible away that they can use and apply, and then probably read later on if they haven't absorbed all the information. So that's available online as well as a digital resource. But the Stored Grain Information Hub has a stack of smaller information parcels as well that growers might want to work their way through. As well as the videos that I mentioned before. So all those YouTube videos that were recorded with GRDC are on the Stored Grain website as well, down here. So if you're looking for something to pop into your next newsletter, that might be an option as well. I mentioned the Twitter handle, 1-800-Weevil, where we tend to pop information about work that we're doing. Couple of examples here. Last week I was on the road between Brisbane and Canberra. And while you might not think that's relevant for WA growers, there's certainly some tips and tricks that these growers that we were providing case studies on that could be applied in the West. For example, gas-tight sealable sheds that haven't typically been available before. So we tend to get a bit of information up about the activities of the group, the research and extension team around grain storage there. Okay, I'll just pop back to the presentation. Michelle, does that come up okay for you now? Okay, great.
We're back to the main presentation.
Lovely, thank you. So yeah, the groups can be anywhere from a grower with half a dozen neighbours to a larger group. So I'm actually happy to talk to small groups as well, because I actually find that engagement is really good there. So don't be worried if you think your numbers are small. Give us a yell. If there's just a couple of people in the group, I'll try and tie it in with other workshops that I might be doing in the area, or other research work that I might be doing with the say Condinin group in the area as well. And while I'm talking about the Condinin group work, I'm also obviously pretty happy to extend information that comes through that channel as well. So there's a little bit more than just grain storage, if that's of interest. As I mentioned, I'm part of a grain storage extension team. I look after the West and a little bit of South Australia, but we do have a pretty big contingent on the East Coast. So I'm the person that looks after the West and happily doing so anywhere from pretty much Una down to Conding up. So happy to travel anywhere between there to come and see people. And of course, my time is paid for. So there's no cost to any of the grower groups for my engagement at that level. A couple of thoughts that we had with regard to opportunities where there might be a joint event. I am also involved in the GRDC grain harvesting workshops that will be happening later on in the year in September. The dates are there. I do have had a couple of requests around those dates that sort of might work, and happy to, if those dates suited anyone else, happy to try and work in a side serving of grain storage. We will be talking a little bit about grain storage at those harvester events. So I'm happy to chat to people there as well. And as I mentioned before, I'm always on the road with Conding Group work, and happy to talk about any of the machinery and technology work that we do in that sphere as well. So I suppose trying to, if people are worried they might not want just grain storage, happy to talk a little bit of grain storage and then a little bit of it might be self-propelled sprayers or technology that we've seen around the world. And I think one of the important things about the joint workshops is just reaching those growers who don't know what they don't know. We do find that in a lot of cases, where we have a joint workshop, people are coming along for one section of information that they think they want to know about. If we can give them a little bit of information on grain storage, in a lot of cases, they may learn something that they didn't know they needed to know. And the use of phosphine is one that we find regularly. Some poor practices get brought up. Not that we're going to shame anyone. We just want to make sure that we can help them make phosphine more effective and that they can use it safely. So I just thought I'd run through a couple of the other activities that we do. There is a little bit of research work, and of course, when we come and do workshops on farm or at a grower group event, we like to talk about some of the research that's happening, so people are getting access to the cutting edge of the latest information that's out there. Things like fumigating bags of grain is something that people want to know about, and it's pretty easy to get fumigant into grain storage bags. It's pretty difficult to get it back out, so happy to talk people through that process. But it is becoming a requirement for people who are storing grain in bags for longer periods of time. And you can also see a couple of photos there of work that we've done on grain aeration, and that's a real opportunity for WA growers. Only 5% of growers have taken up aeration on the East Coast. That's sort of upwards 70+%. So a real opportunity there because it is effective in the West and it does work well. In a lot of cases, growers that are using aeration have found that they don't need to use phosphine. And it's an opportunity for older silos that aren't gas tight and sealable. So happy to work growers through that process and get them up to speed with how they can utilise something like aeration in their existing grain storage infrastructure. The other thing that we can do is obviously help growers with regard to their purchasing decisions through the Conding Group and a joint project with the GRDC Stored Grain Extension team. We tested every gas tight sealable storage make and model around the country. It was a pretty massive undertaking, but ultimately, if we can help inform growers as to let's call them best and worst features of each of the silos that are on the market, they can make a wise purchasing decision and pick the silo that's best suited to their operation. So that collaborative testing, we're happy to talk about, and we're happy to extend the information that was gathered through that. Also happy to talk about the economics because there's a lot of questions about domestic storage opportunities where people might pick up an additional market, say for livestock feed, that they want to just do the numbers on. We're happy to work through there. We've got a template that we can work through with that. I'll cover in a tick. Planning is really important. I'd much rather talk to people prior to them purchasing silos or making a grain storage investment than them ringing up saying, "Oh, look, I've got these silos that I bought last year and they're just not working for me. What can we do?" In a lot of cases, it's obviously preferable to get to people prior to them making that purchasing decision so we can help them out. And also planning, I've mentioned there as well, because there are a lot of things that people probably need to consider when they're laying out a grain storage facility that they may not have thought of. There's about a checklist of about 15 or 20 things that we're happy to work through with growers. So always happy to come along and even on an individual basis talk to growers on that level. So I'm just going to run through some of the topics that we'd normally cover during a grain storage, whether it's a webinar, on-farm workshop, or in-person one-on-one. Grain storage hygiene and structural treatments is one that's absolutely essential. Starting clean is important. So we talk about the use of diatomaceous earth, talk about phenolphthalein, which is a chemistry that's under a little bit of pressure at the moment. It may not be around for long. We talk about the importance of hygiene and why that's important relative to grain stored and how it can give us the best possible start to maintaining the quality of grain in storage. I mentioned the planning phase of things, and talking about grain storage investment planning considerations, thinking about the stages that might be required when people are making a grain storage investment. Things like weigh bridges can be invaluable down the track. We just want to make sure that people think about their location and their layout before they set down silos, and particularly large flat bottoms. Once they're down, they're not likely to be moved at any stage. So happy to talk people through that process. We talk a lot about fumigation, as I mentioned, trying to protect phosphine and its efficacy. You can see a little flow chart there where we talk about the fumigation process and the things that influence that. Whether what the temperature of the grain is, and also whether you've got aeration fans. And I guess what we're trying to do there is make sure that people understand that fumigation is a process, and it takes between 10 and 17 days, depending on what their infrastructure looks like. And also, we want to make sure that ultimately it is effective. And we try and explain to people why it is important to follow that process and that flow chart. Insect identification, it is a pretty important thing, because insect ID is an aspect that might influence, I guess, our approach to insect control. It also gives us an idea as to whether we might have something foreign in there that shouldn't be there. So from a biosecurity perspective, it's pretty important to understand what grain storage insects we might have. The flower beetles, you've got there the larger photo. That's the biggest problem we have in WA. That's where if we see grain storage insect pests, that's typically what we will see. And the southern part of the state, and certainly with the bulk handlers, the rice weevil, which is the one, the top right of frame there, is the main issue that we have in the southern parts, and certainly with the bulk handlers. We do focus a lot on safety. We want to make sure that people are using things like phosphine, with all the required PPE, so full face, a mask with a B category filter. We want to make sure that they've got elbow-length gloves, cotton overalls, and also you'll see that the chap there is wearing a safety harness, and that's important too, because quite often you're working at heights, and fall restraint is absolutely essential. So we want to make sure people do, follow those safety requirements when operating around silos and when using phosphine. Just as a side note, phosphine it can be smelled at about 2 parts per million, but at 1 part per million, it's already doing you nerve damage. So it is a pretty noxious chemical, and it's a pretty dangerous chemical. As I said, it's very cheap and it's very effective, but it needs to be used properly. The pressure testing is something that's really popular. We do a lot of workshops where we come along and we do a gas-tight sealable silo pressure test, and it's a 3-minute to 5-minute process. And you can see these 2 silos here. Basically, the one on the left is much better sealed than the one on the right. So we try and explain to people how that process can be done. And one of the challenges we've got is you can see a small sticker on the photo in the background of the right-hand image there. That's a silo stuck. That's a sticker stuck to all gas-tight sealable silos, and it talks about the oil levels. One of the more popular makes of silo in WA doesn't actually have a visible oil level. So while that sticker's stuck on it, it's very difficult to actually follow. So we try and get around and demonstrate to people how to do a gas-tight sealable silo pressure test. We talk about options for organic growers and those that don't or can't use chemistry. So happy to chat about nitrogen and CO2 as options, and we've done a few workshops for organic growers on that front, and they're reasonably popular because it's pretty specialist information. So an inert gas like one of those two and a controlled atmosphere is something that we focus on and trying to explain to growers what's required to actually be able to use some of the, one of those two gases. As I mentioned, aeration is a topic that we cover. It's not something that we use a lot of in the West, and we really should be using it a lot more. Aeration fans are very simple. It's just basically blowing ambient air at the right temperature and humidity into the grain, keeping it cool. And if we can keep grain cool, the pressure from insects is greatly reduced. We also talk about aeration controllers on the left-hand side there. So, automating the aeration process. Wet harvest options, quite often we'll have situations in some parts of the state where we've got a wet harvest and we need to be able to handle wet grain, whether that's drying the grain down, whether that's storing it temporarily in a shed and then blending up. Happy to talk about the options that growers have, and look, they needn't be daunted by wet grain. It is something we can do something about if they've got the infrastructure there. And in most cases, they just need to buy themselves some time till the grain dries out, and they can blend it up with other grain coming in from harvest once things dry out a little. We're talking about monitoring and resistance testing. So, monitoring is about taking samples of grain and just checking it to make sure that there aren't large swarms of insects in there. We want to make sure that if there are insects in there and they haven't had a good kill with phosphine and they've been doing it in accordance with best practice, that we can help them out with some resistance testing. And we talk about gathering a sample and sending it off to the lab. So happy to chat about that as well and get growers up to speed if they think they might have an issue. And then we talk about grain storage options, and we'll talk about let's call it the standard sort of grain storage options, which would be elevated cone-based silos there on the left, working through. Then we've got large flat bottom silos sort of towards the centre of frame. Grain bags are also very popular, particularly in the south. And then we can also talk about grain storage bunkers, which are a lower cost form of storage. They can be fumigated. They're not as easy. They have to be done properly, and earthworks are important. And then also a less conventional method of storage, which is used in some parts of certainly the eastern states, is grain pits, so actually burying the grain in the ground. Now, this is more as a drought opportunity. So when grain prices are low, a pit in the ground done properly, grain can be stored in there in a zero oxygen environment for up to 10 years or better. So we actually saw some instances of that last week in central New South Wales where that had been done successfully. So happy to talk about all those options for WA growers as well. I mentioned the grain storage economics. So where there's a domestic market opportunity, happy to talk growers through that as well. Is it worth buying silos? Yes or no? Is it worth making that investment? Where's the cutoff in terms of what we buy versus what we need? And I think the one point I'd make there is the most expensive form of grain storage is the one that doesn't work. So where we've got grain spoilage, for example, we've lost grain, we've had excessive amounts of shrinkage. That obviously becomes a very expensive method of grain storage. So I'd much rather talk to people about doing it right in the first place. So that sort of wraps up. I suppose one of the challenges are, that we've got some resistance, and we're certainly very reliant on phosphine. There are markets that require pesticide residue-free grain. So yes, while there has been recently a release of a protectant, we don't typically use it in WA because it limits our marketing opportunities. We do have some late adopters, with regard to risk, and that potentially jeopardises their reputation as an industry and may present some market access challenges. Quite often we see misinformation from manufacturers, so we want to try and stem that as best we can. And then grain delivery requirements are quite stringent, and we want to make sure that the growers don't rock up at any delivery site and get rejected and turned around. Post-workshop, we always offer support, and as I mentioned, that 100 Weevil line is really important. Quite often, 3 weeks after a workshop, I'll get a call on that 100 Weevil line from growers who either weren't comfortable asking a question at the workshop in front of peers, or they've thought about something and or they're at the silo, or they've found an issue that they've come up with regard to grain storage. So always happy to provide that independent advice. It's unbiased, it's evidence-based. Wherever we can provide advice that helps growers out, we will do that. And I do have some lengthy conversations with growers as to what options they've got. to get themselves out of a sticky situation. So with that, happy to hand back to you, Michelle. Happy to take any questions, any comments, suggestions, ideas are all welcome. And as I say, my contact details are there, 1-800-WEEVIL. So happy to chat to anyone at any stage about how I might be able to help their grower group get some information about grain storage to their members.
Beautiful. Thanks so much for that, Ben. Listen, we're going to throw to the floor for questions. I do have a few that have came through in the chat, but if anyone else wants to pop them in, or if you just want to put your hand up and ask Ben direct, that's fabulous as well. So the first one was actually one I was quite curious about. This does seem like quite an ongoing issue. So if any of the grower groups have already had you come to their location and talk, are you able to do another presentation there? And is there like a good kind of optimal interval between?
You bet. That's actually the way we prefer to do it. So, yeah, you're right. We do tend to go to locations on a number of times, and what we tend to do is start off with the 101. So start off with the basic stuff, and then we'll come along and provide more detailed information. So we'll do the 101, then we'll come back and give a more advanced level of information, and that can continue. Depending on what the growers want, you know, and a good example will be come along, talking about hygiene, talking about diatomaceous earth, talking about fumigation. Then we'll come back and talk about aeration. We'll talk about, you know, the opportunities for expansion and how they might be able to do, you know, grain storage on farm better. So yeah, there are phases, I suppose, if you like, and more than happy to come back and give an additional level of information. But you're right, it is an ongoing issue, and the resistance issue isn't going away anytime soon. So I guess what we need to do is maintain vigilance there, Michelle.
Okay, cool. Actually, that quite nicely leads on to the next one. So I was sort of wondering, what is your estimate of best practice knowledge around farmers? You know, is this something that the farmers are actually prioritizing? There's a lot of peer-to-peer learning that is, I guess, accurate knowledge.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the misinformation is one of the big challenges we've got, because, I suppose poor application of phosphine is really detrimental. That's what actually drives the resistance side of things. So we want to try and stem that as best we can. So that's a challenge. Always trying to I guess wash that out of the learnings or the minds of growers. And there's some really old school thinking there. You know, things like putting lime on grain. You know, that's something that was done in the 60s. Yeah, does it work? Well, yeah, it sort of works with about 15% efficacy. So there are much better options out there. So we try and work through those things. And I think as part of the grain storage workshop, we always do a survey at the end. And as I mentioned, we've got those follow-up phone calls. And look, buy-in is quite good in most cases. We see growers, about 75% of growers will retain three key pieces of information from a 101 class or 101 workshop. So it's pretty good. But we always need to mop up, and I guess the other thing is that there's always, additional learning on top of that. So, more information we provide, but we want to get those key pieces of information across first. So, yeah.
Sounds good. I've got a question here about dichotomous earth. Where does that fit in?
Diatomaceous earth,
yes, thank you.
Yeah, so diatomaceous earth, or DE, or dryaside, as it's commercially known sometimes, that's a really valuable tool in structural hygiene. We need to basically, what we do is we'd wash out the grain silo, or sweep all the grain out, wash it out on a dry day, and then we'd apply diatomaceous earth inside. So that's really easily done just with a blowback gun, which is a push-pull gun that's hooked up to an air compressor. So it just basically sucks the diatomaceous earth, and you only need like 300 grams in a standard sort of 100-ton silo. We basically blow that into the silo, and then that's a structural treatment that works physically. So unlike most chemistry, if you look at this stuff under a microscope, it's got thousands of little parts in it. Some are quite spiky, and what they actually do is, as the insect's walking around, it walks over this stuff. That spike cuts the cuticle on the insect desiccates or dries out and dies. So it's a physical mode of action, and that means it's really effective, and there's no resistance, which is fantastic. And I should add that diatomaceous earth is dug out of the ground. So ultimately, we're looking at the skeletal remains of the diatomites, which are buried in the ground. That's crushed up. That's diatomaceous earth. And that's the stuff that does a fantastic job of insect control in structural treatments. Now, we should add that as far as CBH is concerned, it's a class 1 contaminant because it's, it can change the angle of repose in the grain, but that's as a protectant level. We're only talking about it as a structural treatment, and on that basis, we absolutely recommend it hands down over spraying something nasty like phenolphthalein inside the silo, which no one likes doing, and it also exposes growers and their staff to potential chemical risk. So we try and stick to the diatomaceous earth, which I should add is an organic product, so it's certified by the organic side of things, and in that regard, it's quite popular.
Wow, that's really fascinating.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's not expensive. We're talking, that's 300 grams. We're talking about maybe about $6 a silo to treat it, and it's it does a fantastic job. Yeah, so yeah,
that's really cool. Okay, what else have we got here? Someone was just bringing up the harvester losses workshop. So we've got, what is it, 4 of them being delivered through Facey Group, 10th to the 16th.
Yeah, that's right.
Ask the location. So
if you like, I can flick back to that slide.
Yeah, beautiful. I think I've just got it here. Does this sound right to you? On the 16th of September, we've got you at Esperance. 17th, you're at Gardner. 18th, Dumble Young. Oh, nope, sorry, gone the wrong line. 10th,
there we go.
Got you.
11th, Dumble Young, Gardner on the 10th, Wiki on the 12th, Beacon 13th, and Esperance 16th. That's the latest dates that I've got there, Michelle. So fingers crossed that's correct. They may be subject to change, but certainly happy to work with any grower groups with regard to those. As I mentioned, I travel a fair bit in any case, so happy to coordinate that. A visit to a grow group with any of the other work I do. I'm regularly between you and Conding up on the road, so always happy to drop by and talk to growers.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, that's really amazing, Ben. I've got to say, I'm so impressed with just how absolutely available you are to growers in the state on this project. I don't think I've seen any other program where somebody literally has a phone line you can dial them on, and they're basically willing to help you with any bit of the process.
Absolutely.
I wish I had a few more resources like that in my quiver. So guys, we do have just a quick little survey. I'll pop that down in the chat for you guys. And this is just so we can follow up and see if you want access to any more resources or a little bit of feedback on the session. Okay, just give me a tick to get that one down. And then while people are doing that, just a really big thank you, Ben. We'll leave the participants to finish off the survey and close the session now. And that's actually a wrap on GGA's first Extension Fest series. So thank you so much to everyone who was a part of it, giving their time. Yeah, big goodbye, everybody, and enjoy your day.
Thank you, Michelle, and thanks for the opportunity.
Pleasure.